Hello and welcome to this video about getting started with a multi-page responsive website. The tools we'll be using are GitHub Desktop, as well as VS Code, and of course the internet, including github.com. All right, here I am in GitHub Desktop, and I want to start a new repository synonymous with domain. I'm going to go ahead and start a site about mythical creatures. Mythical-creatures. And I'm going to add it and then hit create. Here we're going to name the repository the same thing, mythical-creatures. The description should help you to understand what is in this repository, and in this case, we are getting started coding a multi-page and responsive website. All right, you can put whatever you want in there. Just to remember what it is. The local path you can choose here. I have a local path to my computer that goes to a folder that is where all of my github.io repositories are. I'm not going to change that because that's where I want all my repositories to be. I am going to initialize that repository with a README. I can git ignore in this case, and then I can go ahead and choose which license I want. This one is the most robust. This helps us protect our work while it's on GitHub. Now then, by doing that, GitHub Desktop has created that folder in my local drive. So here it is. Here's my local drive. I have my folder that I keep all my github.io stuff in, and it's created mythical-creatures, it's put in the license, and it's put in the README. So that is taken care of. Now then, I want to publish the repository because that's going to take that information and push it up to github.com where my repositories are being stored. So I'm going to go ahead and leave the name of mythical creatures. I'm going to leave the description. I'm going to uncheck keep this code private because we're going to go ahead and publish it. And I'm going to publish that repository. And now what that's doing is pushing that up to my profile on GitHub. And again, I can see that by clicking view on GitHub. And there it is. We have our new mythical creatures. It has a Git attributes file with nothing in it. It has the license that I chose. It has that README file. I can see I did that a minute ago. Perfection. I'm going to go back to GitHub Desktop, and now what I want to do is go ahead and open my Visual Studio Code. It's going to go ahead and open that in its new window if you have several open. It'll save that repository, of course, as mythical creatures, and then you have the files within it. And of course, we're going to get started with an HTML. So we're going to create a new file. We're going to name it index.html. And this is the magical file, right? This file is going to be what opens when someone goes to this domain, mythical creatures. So it's special. It's named index for a reason, and that means something. So we're going to go ahead and add our doc type by hitting Shift and the number 1. And this will bring in the doc type. You should absolutely know how to write the doc type on your own, but as you get more acclimated to code, you can use your shortcuts. Now then, this site is going to be about mythical creatures, so that is the title, mythical creatures, that I want to appear on the tab in the browser window, so I'm going to put that there. And then everything that's going to be in the browser window is going to be here in the body tags. Now then, this is a story. An HTML document is telling a story. We're going to tell it from the beginning to the end. That story is going to have a beginning and a middle and an end. And that's the order it's got to be in this page. Visual, at this point, has nothing to do with it. We are just telling our story. So within the body, we will almost always have header. Header is defined by being the introductory content. The content that will be held in there will be all introductory. The next thing we have is a nav, the navigation for the page, our table of content, if you're looking at kind of the storytelling analogy. Then we're going to have main. This is the main content, so the main part of the story. After we've introduced main, we could list or give content that's adjacent to main, so aside. For example, if you are watching a show on Netflix, that would be the main content. And if you were getting a recommendation for a show based on the fact that you were watching that, it would be in the aside. And then the end, the conclusion, is going to be our footer. This is almost always the framework that you're going to have. Sometimes your nav is in your header. That's totally fine. It can be. Sometimes you don't have an aside. Also totally fine. But pretty much header, main, and footer are going to be your staples and going to be the first level, block level children of body. What do I mean by that? If body is a container, it contains 5 other containers. So you can think of it as packing. There's a big old box, and that box's name is body. And inside that box, you have 5 other boxes, and each of those are labeled header, nav, main, aside, and footer. Or you look at the parent-child relationship. This is the parent, and because these are all falling underneath it and tabbed once over, these are their children. That's going to come really important when we start to look at the responsiveness of this site. Okay, so now we have our header, main, header, nav, main, footer, and aside. We're going to put in some content. So header, being that it is defined by being the introductory information of the website, is always going to have the H1. That in this case is mythical creatures. All right. It can also have an image, like a logo. It can also have like a little paragraph of information, which we'll go ahead and add. A website about mythical creatures. Wonderful. Then we're going to go on to nav, and nav is our table of contents. And so nav, it needs a label. Notice that header, if we consider this a container, it's got to be labeled. That label is mythical creatures. Nav also containing information. The kind of information it's going to contain is the main navigation. It also always includes an unordered list of links. Could be ordered list though too. So we're going to have our list item, and it's going to be a link that goes somewhere. In this case, we're just going to have it go to hashtag, which will make it act and look and think like a link, but won't actually go anywhere. And there we have our first list item. The content that goes in between those A tags is going to be what the content is about. And so we'll kind of list our first animal or mythical creature as the unicorn. And then I'm going to copy and paste this twice and then change that unicorn to some other mythical creature and dragon. And my third mythical creature is going to be a fairy. All right, so we have navigation. Navigation is labeled main navigation. It's a list of unordered links. We've got that set. Now we're going into main content. Main doesn't need to be labeled. All right, header has the H1, nav is going to have an H2. Main, in this case, is going to have a bunch of sections in it, potentially, and they will be labeled. So I don't need to put a label right here, but we're going to go ahead and add a section of content. We'll break that section open, and we'll go ahead and give an introduction of a label for unicorn. And we're going to do that again for the other two. So I'm going to copy that and paste it twice. And again, change out that content from unicorn to dragon, and the last one to fairy. Okay. Next, after the main content, we have a side content. We can say this is related to, like, just because you're on a page that's about mythical creatures, you might also be interested in this. So it's not about mythical creatures, it's about something in tangent to magical creatures. This will also have a heading, and that might be something like mythical creatures. You might also be interested in storybooks. All right. And then we have our footer, which is our conclusion content. Footer is like main. It doesn't have to have a heading in it, but it can. And so a lot of times it'll have like a section of content that has social media links, and a section of content that's got the address and phone number. Could also have one with a contact sheet or contact information. I'm going to go ahead and add small. Small is the tag that we use for legal ease, and it's just going to be copyright 2024. All right, so we have some content on our page here. We probably want to pad it out a little bit more so we have some content to look at on our page, but let's go ahead and hit save. We're going to flip back to GitHub Desktop to see that it is noticing that we have new content there. And the whole point of using Git is that it's a software versioning control. We're going to save the versions that we make so that we can go back to one of those if we need to. So here we've done a significant amount of work. We want to label that, and we've created the index, so that's what we're going to say. And the description, kind of the same, create index. So if I ever need to go back to the beginning, I can do that. And if I need to go back somewhere in the middle, I can do that because I'll be reading these labels and I can go back to them. Now I'm going to commit to main, and then I'm going to push that up. And so this means my file is saved locally as well as saved in my repository on GitHub. All right, and then I'm going to go back to my VS Code, and I'm going to take a look at it by right mouse clicking on my file and opening in my default browser. And here we have our content so far: mythical creatures, unicorn, dragon, and fairy. And if you like that, you might also like storybooks. So this is using the browser's default style, which for this project, we're going to go ahead and use it. You're typically going to use a CSS reset to kind of shut down the browser style, but in this case, we're going to go ahead and leave it. All right, I'm going to go back to my Visual Studio Code and just give myself a little bit more content to play with. Here in the section of unicorn, I'm going to add a paragraph, and I'm going to type lorem and then hit tab, and now I have a paragraph, and I'm going to do that for all of them. A little shortcut to adding some content when you are working on a project like this, where you're just kind of demonstrating. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and put lorem and tab. And there I have a couple of paragraphs about information. I'm going to do the same for aside, lorem, and tab. All right. Also going to hit save, which is updating my GitHub. And if this was significant, I could go ahead and push this at this point. So I could say added content. And push that up, so now we're on the same page. And if I ever need to come back to this place where I added the content, I can do that. All right, back to Visual Studio Code. And I've got the makings of my website. I have this page, this HTML document is a story. We're telling a story. We're telling the beginning and the middle of the end, header, main, footer. We have those building blocks in there, which are generally going to be the same. And now we want to probably add some sort of style to it. So we'll go right here into our Explorer, and use that same new file icon, and we're going to type style.css. Typically, it is called style.css, and there is sort of a typical order that we're going to put this page in. The first is going to be giving authorship, so we'll say CSS by Christina. And then there is sort of a methodology, sort of a best practices for putting in your content after this. And I'm just going to go ahead and paste it in because this is what I like to do. Now, I have lots of lead lines here, and that's because when I'm scrolling through thousands of lines of code, I want to be able to see what section I'm going to be in. So the very first thing that I want to do is save space for imported fonts. So if I'm using Google Fonts, whether I'm using @import or @fontface, I'm going to put them right there. If I'm using a CSS reset, I'm going to go ahead and put it there, making sure to cite who I got it from. Then my root variables, if I want to add any variables that I want to call throughout this, they would go up here. And then we'll start our global styles, right? And typically we're going to start with mobile first, or the smallest size. This is because the document, the way it is right now, it's in order. It can be read from top to bottom and make sense. And on the smallest screen size, that makes sense. We want it to be in that exact same order. So one column, typically mobile first, typically small. We're going to put our styles in there. Then, after we have all the styles that we want to always kind of be there, then we'll go in with our medium, media query, large, extra large. And you could have more and you could have less. It just depends entirely on your content. So this is the structure that will normally take. We're going to go ahead and just test that we are going to connect these two. So I'm going to go up to my global styles. I'm going to choose HTML. And I'm going to change the background color to Alice Blue and hit save. Then I'm going to go into my index and I'm going to link that to this. So I'm going to add a link in my head tag with the relevance of a style sheet. And then I'm going to link to that file by href and style. There we go. And I'm going to hit save, and I'm going to go back to the rendering and hit refresh. And you can see the background is that very, very light blue, Alice Blue. All right, now I know it works. I'm going to go into my GitHub desktop, which is now recognizing that I've added styles and that I also added a link to it. So I'm going to add in my summary, add style, added style sheet. All right, commit that to main, push it to origin. Now my local file as well as my github.com repository looks the same. They are saved in that space. Back to Visual Studio Code. And I'm going to go into my styles, and I'm going to go ahead and take out that background color of Alice Blue because I don't need it. Just wanted to make sure that we were connected. Now then, the next thing I want to do here is talk about the global style. What do I want to be happening in here? And at the mobile style and small, I want probably one column. So literally don't need to do anything. It's already doing that. It's already showing in one column. But in order to show you how that will change over the other media query styles, I'm going to go ahead and select body. And I'm going to declare that it's the parent, display grid, and hit save. What I've just said here is body. I want you to be the parent, and I want to control these block level children, right? Header, nav, main, aside, footer. And if we've used our proper tabbing, we should be able to easily see who body is the parent of, right? These are the children, header, nav, main, aside, and footer. This section is a child of main, so it's a grandchild of body. But when we're looking at grid or even flex, this is only going to control children, not the grandchildren. We can nest grid within grid, and we'll do that. By default, then grid is going to start out as one template, and I'm going to just go ahead and show you what that essentially would look like if we did code it. So grid template columns, 1FR, meaning one fraction, one column. So if I save and go back to my browser and hit refresh, we don't really see any change there because that's the default move, but it won't be. In fact, let's go back into Visual Studio Code and let's go to our medium query. So the first thing we want to do with our media query is say @media for screens and a minimum width of 500 pixels. And then we're going to say if this condition, in the case that the media is a screen and that the screen size is a minimum width of 500, then I want you to do these rules, these CSS rules instead, right? If this condition matches, I want you to change this, right? So I don't need to call display grid again, but I do want to make this say 2 columns instead of 1. So what I'm going to do is overwrite exactly that same thing. So I like to copy it and paste it and then say, okay, do I want it to still be displaying grid? Yep. So I'm going to go ahead and delete that because I don't need to change that. But grid template columns 1FR, I do want to change that to 1FR, 1FR and hit save. So in the case that I have less than 500 pixels, I'm going to have 1 column of content. But in the case that I have at least 500, I'm going to have 2. So I'm going to go ahead and save, and then I'm going to render back into my browser and hit refresh. And you can see the page is obviously more than 500 pixels, and so it was like, cool, I will give you 2 columns. Now then, if I squish it back down, and Chrome won't squish lower than 500, thanks Chrome for that. I'll show you what it looks like in Mozilla. All right, just using a different browser so I can squish my page smaller than 500 pixels. I'm going to go ahead and squish it down, and you can see there, as we get under 500 pixels, we're looking at 1 column worth of content. Whenever we meet that condition that we have a minimum width that's bigger than 500, we see it just switch there to the 3rd column. We'll go ahead and keep that going. So we'll go into the large media query, and I'm basically going to write the same thing. I'm just going to copy it. And instead of a min width of 500, I'm going to make it 800. And instead of grid template columns 1FR, 1FR, I'm going to add another 1FR to make it 3 columns. So I'm going to save. I'm going to go back to Firefox because it's helping me. Chrome wasn't. Here's my mobile style, 1 column. Here's my medium style, 2 columns. And here is my large style, 3 columns. We'll keep that going, and we'll go ahead and do it again with the extra large. We'll change that minimum width to something like 1200. Whoops, that was way too much. And we'll make it 4 columns, so we'll add an FR, we'll save, flip back to our browser, refresh, and now we have our small or mobile first screen. We have our medium with 2 columns. We have our large with 3 columns, and then we have our extra large with 4 columns. All right, we've done a lot of work now, so we want to make sure that we've saved and that we've gone back into GitHub Desktop and that we've committed all of this. So we updated style. Indeed, that is what we did. Update style. And we'll go ahead and commit that and push it. And now what we want to do is publish this page, right? So we're going to go ahead and go back to view on GitHub desktop. And we can see there that our index and our styles have been updated. And if we click on either, we can see all of the code that's happening there, which is great. This is excellent for your portfolio. This is the thing that people will want to look at, is they want to get into the guts of your code and see what kind of stuff you're doing. So here we are in Mythical Creatures. You want to make sure you're logged in, and we're going to go to Settings. On the left navigation, we're going to scroll down to Pages, and we're going to go ahead and deploy that. So we're going to deploy that from main and hit Save. And then what it's going to do is post that to the internet. And if you hit refresh a million times, it'll pop up here when your domain has been published. Now then, as you've published your domain, any changes you make and push to your repository are automatically going to publish as well. So the any updates you make now and push through are going to be added to that. Let's go ahead and hit refresh again. All right, once it's been published, you'll see that your site is live here. It'll have your profile username, github.io, and then your repository here. It is never going to change this site. This site will also be it's always going to be the root of your site. So as you add pages and whatnot, you're not going to see those pages reflected in the URL. That'll be up to you to kind of figure out. So if I take a look at this page that is now published on the internet, I can see that it's published at that site, CCARRA1, which is my username, and the repository of Mythical Creatures. This is the index.html page, but index is magical, so I don't need to put it on there in order for it to show. All right. Now then, we're going to go back into our Visual Studio Code, and we're going to make another page for our website. In fact, we're probably going to make 3 pages, right? One for each of those mythical creatures. So I'm going to go into New File. I'm going to name that one unicorn.html. Then I'm going to get my doc type information. I'm going to name this page Mythical Creatures because that's the website that I'm on, and then I'm going to give sort of a dash with unicorn. All right, so this page is going to be about the unicorn. I'm going to do the same thing with the body. I'm going to have the same story. I'm going to tell the same order. It's going to be a beginning and a middle and an end. So I have header. I have nav. Oops, that's fine. I have main. I might have an aside. And then I have the footer, right? Beginning, middle, and an end. This is the order the story is going to go in. All right, in my header, I'm going to go ahead and add my introductory information, my H1 of unicorn. And then for the nav, I'm actually going to copy the same nav that I have from the other page, just to save me a sec. And then in main, I'm going to have sections that directly support my H1, which is unicorn. So I'm going to have a section about something related to unicorns. Obviously, their horn is a thing you might want to know about. And then I'll have other sections of content there that also speak to the unicorn. So maybe can they fly? I think so. I don't know. And I think they have glitter. That's just my guess. The aside in this case might be something like if you're on this page about unicorns, you might want to buy a unicorn. So that'll be our side, and then in the footer, same information. We're going to have probably the same footer per every page on this site. So I could have just copied and pasted it, but we're just going to put copyright 2024. Now we're going to hit save. And we're going to go back into GitHub Desktop, see that it's added this information about unicorn. Create unicorn. Yep, that's exactly what I did. Create a page. I'm going to save that and push it. And now it is also going to be on GitHub. All right, if I go back to my repository, you can now see the addition of unicorn. It is there, and it's at unicorn.html. So if I want to check that it is in fact up and running, then I'm going to go to my domain, CCARRA1 at github.io/mythicalcreatures. I'm currently looking at index because that's what's going to play by default. And then I'm going to add unicorn.html. And there's my unicorn information. If I go back to GitHub and I look at settings in pages, it's still only giving my domain because that's all it's ever going to give, right? This is your domain. You are going to add the pathways around it. Now, typically that's going to be in the navigation, which makes a lot of sense. So let's go back to navigation. And let's add that, a link to this unicorn page. We might link actually to unicorn.html. We're going to go ahead and hit save. It makes sense also then that we would go ahead and update this one. And hit save. Now we're going to go into GitHub. We're going to add nav links. Commit to main, push that to origin. So now we can go back to that rendered page with our mythical creatures. And if we click unicorn, it's going to automatically take us to unicorn.html. And we can continue on with the rest of those. But first, let's take a look at the page itself and go, what's happening here with the style? We've got it in responsive. We've got 4 columns. We know if we squish the page down, we're going to get 3 columns and then 2 columns and then 1. But really, the only one that makes any sense visually is this first one, right? There's no real style to it other than some text features. But this one makes perfect sense. It's laid out in a way that makes sense. And as we sort of get to here, this isn't exactly the way we would look at it. But what you can see is where those parent-child relationship was, right? If body was our parent and it has 5 kids, 1 was header, 2 was main, 1 was header, 1 was nav, 1 was main, 1 was aside, and then here's footer. It is doing 4 columns, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then our 5th one starts over on the other line. Now, it doesn't make any sense really as a layout, so let's go ahead and go in and fix that a bit. So I'm going to switch back into Visual Studio Code. I'm going to go into Style, and I'm going to start down here at that biggest size, right? So where I have these 4 columns and go, oh, that doesn't make any sense. What I'm going to do now is give some additional styles to make that look a little more visually appealing, help my users get through the page and that content. So the first thing is that I'm looking at this H1, and usually the H1, the introduction, is like the full length of the whole page, right? Navigation, sometimes the full length of the page, sometimes it's down on the side. And so let's go ahead and do that. Let's go ahead and take Mythical Creatures, which is our header, and we're going to make it stretch the whole length of the page. And we're still going to maintain the 4 columns. This is how we do that. First, we've told the body, which is the parent, to be grid template columns, 4 columns. Perfect, it's doing that. And now we're going to write a more specific rule. So now we're going to go ahead and say, hey, header, who is the first child, what I want you to do actually is to grid column, start in column 1 and end at the end of the page. So -1. That means no matter if I have 3 columns or 4 columns or 50 columns, header will always start at 1 and end at the end of the page. And I'm going to hit save, and then I'm going to go ahead and render it. And there it is. We have Mythical Creatures, the header, starting from 1 and ending at the end. And then it goes back to the template. So now nav is next. So nav is in column 1. Main is in column 2. Aside is in column 3. And the copyright or footer is in column 4. So we can go in and do the same thing and say, oh, footer is usually the bottom of the screen there too. So we'll go back to Visual Studio Code. And because I want the same thing, I'm just going to add a group selector. So I want both header and footer. To do that, I'm going to save, flip back, hit refresh, and now this is taking up this whole space. Now I have 5 children of body. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But there's a big space here. That's because we told it to do something different. So even though we've said do 4 columns, there is nothing to put here because we told this one to go here, but it's going to maintain that space because we told it to do 4 columns. So there's something, of course, we can do. We probably want to make this main section bigger, right? It's the main story. We want it to have more of a visual weight on the page. So we'll go back to our Visual Studio Code, and we're going to look at main, and lots of different ways we could do this. We could have the grid column span 2. We could tell it to start and end at a certain spot, and that's what I like to do. So I'm going to say grid dash column, and I want it to start in row 2, and I want it to end in row 4. 4 minus 2 is 2, so it's going to span 2. Save, go back to my browser, refresh. And now main is carrying more weight. It has 2 columns. Main navigation has 1, and the aside has 1. And then both the header and the footer are taking up the entire page there, which is exactly what we want. Now, if we squish our page down to the next breakpoint, it all changes. But why does it change? Because we're running on conditional statements, and we've only asked these things to do this when it's in this media query, when the page is more than 1200. So at this breakpoint, it's gone back to 3 columns, and so header takes up 1, nav takes up 2, main takes up 3, storybook starts on the next line and is in column 1, and then the 5th one is going to be there in column 2. Let's go ahead and take a look at switching that. So we're headed back to VS Code, and what we want to do is do this a little bit smarter, because we probably always want header and footer to start at the beginning and end at the end. We're going to actually cut this from just the Excel media query and bring it all the way up to how we're always going to want it within the global style. So now I've gone up to the global style, which is mobile first or small, and said, hey, header and footer, I want you to always be in grid columns, start in 1 and end at the end. Now, again, this is already true because this is 1 column. So we could just put it in the medium since it's not going to start till there. But again, just showing you that this is what it's really doing by default. The fact that we are writing it down makes it more obvious for us to change in the next one. So I'm going to hit save. And I'm going to go back and I'm going to hit refresh. And now we can see that in all of the versions, mythical creatures, our header and our footer span the entire page, right? And again, I'm looking at it on Chrome, which isn't being super helpful, so I'm going to go ahead and copy that into Firefox so that we can see it is working at all of the levels. Mythical creatures and copyright or footer always being that one column, always starting in the first column, always ending in the last column, whether we add 2 columns, 3 columns, or 4 columns. All right. Now we're going to go ahead and go back to Visual Studio Code. We can continue to make those changes that we're looking for here. We can do way more than just the layout, but in the global styles or in the media queries, mostly we're looking at screen real estate. We're looking at changing the layout based on having more room on this page, to do that. We start from the smallest because that is going to be the easiest. We're going to want everything in the same order. We're not necessarily going to want to change order. Lots more, of course, to do in terms of style and getting into those, but today we got up and running with a multiple page website. We have used updates to our repository. We've used github.com to publish our page, and we have added some links.